that identified her as imported merchandise. The placard hung around her neck listed her defects with brutal honesty: advanced age, diminished strength, chronic ailments. Behind her, younger women drew eager bids from wealthy buyers. She received no such attention. For a female slave in ancient Rome, youth meant value and age meant abandonment. Roman slavery claimed between 5 and 10 million people across the empire, and women comprised a substantial portion of this enslaved population. They labored in kitchens, workshops, and wealthy households, their bodies considered property under Roman law, with no claim to personal rights or protections. Unlike their male counterparts, enslaved women faced dual exploitation as laborers whose productivity declined with age, and as beings valued for reproductive capacity that diminished over time. When the years stripped away their usefulness, Roman society revealed its darkest calculations about human worth. The calculated withdrawal of medical care. Roman masters approached the health of their slaves through the lens of economic utility. An enslaved woman in her productive years might receive basic medical attention not out of compassion, but because maintaining her capacity to work protected the master's investment. The agricultural writer Columella, writing in the 1st century, recommended specific food rations for slaves based on their output, treating human sustenance as carefully calibrated fuel for labor machines. But age transformed this economic equation. When strength faded and productivity waned, the financial logic that once justified minimal care evaporated entirely. Cato the Elder embodied this ruthless pragmatism. As Plutarch recounted in his biography of Cato, the statesman treated slaves like beasts of burden, using them to the uttermost and then driving them off and selling them when they grew old. This practice, Plutarch observed with clear disapproval, marked a thoroughly ungenerous nature that recognized no bond between human beings except necessity. The cruelty extended beyond mere neglect. Some masters, unwilling to bear the expense of caring for elderly or sick slaves, resorted to abandonment as a cost-saving measure. By the mid-1st century, this practice had become sufficiently widespread to demand imperial intervention. The Tiber island, home to a temple of Aesculapius the healing god, became a dumping ground where masters left slaves they deemed too expensive to treat. Women who had spent decades serving their masters found themselves abandoned in this sacred precinct, left to die or recover on their own. Emperor Claudius finally addressed this horror around 50 CE, decreeing that slaves abandoned when sick or elderly would be granted freedom if they survived. The law further stipulated that masters who chose to kill such slaves rather than abandon them would face charges of murder. Yet this legislation revealed more than it resolved. The very need for such a law confirmed how common the practice had become, and the provision about killing versus abandoning suggested masters weighed these options as viable alternatives. For aging female slaves, medical abandonment carried particular cruelties. Women who had served as wet nurses, raising their masters' children while their own offspring were sold away, received no gratitude when age diminished their usefulness. Those who had worked until their bodies broke from years of grinding grain, hauling water, or standing at looms found themselves cast out precisely when infirmity made survival most precarious. The brutality of the late-life slave market. When abandonment seemed too risky or legally complicated, masters turned to the slave markets that operated throughout the empire. Rome itself maintained 2 major markets, one near the Temple of Castor in the Forum, another at the Saepta Julia in the Campus Martius. These commercial centers trafficked in human beings with the same casualness that other markets traded livestock. The sale of elderly slaves operated under specific market regulations designed to protect buyers, not the enslaved. The Edict of the Aediles required sellers to disclose any diseases or defects that might diminish a slave's capacity to work. For aging women, this meant public proclamation of their declining worth. The placards hung around their necks detailed chronic ailments, reduced strength, and advancing years. Sellers presented them openly on raised platforms so potential buyers could inspect thoroughly, checking teeth like livestock, looking for signs of illness, and assessing the toll years of servitude had taken. According to Diocletian's price edict from 301 CE, which set maximum prices across the empire, female slaves commanded lower prices than males even in their prime years. The edict valued skilled male slaves at the equivalent of 3 tons of wheat, while skilled females reached only 2.5 tons. For elderly women past their productive peak, values plummeted to almost nothing. Some masters, desperate to recoup any value from aging slaves, doctored them up to appear younger, hoping to deceive buyers into paying marginally better prices. The reality facing these women was grim. Buyers sought bargains, not compassion. An elderly female slave might end up purchased by someone operating a mill or workshop where brutal labor would finish what age had started. Others were sold to establishments where their remaining labor was exploited under harsh and degrading conditions, allowing owners to extract whatever small profit remained. Cato the Elder again exemplified the calculating coldness that governed these transactions. He recommended selling old slaves along with worn-out oxen and broken tools, categorizing aging human beings alongside damaged equipment. When Plutarch challenged this practice, observing that even old draft animals deserved care after years of service, he highlighted a moral failing at the heart of Roman slavery: the complete erasure of human dignity beneath property considerations. Labor, punishment, and exploitation until death. Even when not sold or abandoned, aging female slaves experienced no respite from exploitation. Roman law granted masters nearly unlimited authority over their property, and that authority extended to extracting labor until death. Women who spent their youth in domestic service found their workload undiminished by age. Those who had served as kitchen workers continued hauling water and tending fires regardless of aching joints or failing eyesight. Former hairdressers and personal attendants found themselves reassigned to cruder tasks as age stripped away the qualities that once made them desirable. The textile workshops that employed thousands of enslaved women showed no mercy to those whose fingers grew stiff or whose vision dimmed. Agricultural estates proved particularly merciless. Women who labored in the fields from dawn until darkness faced the same demands in their later years, their aging bodies pushed to match the output of younger slaves. When an enslaved woman could no longer meet quotas, punishment followed. Roman masters employed a range of punishments to compel obedience and maintain productivity. Flogging remained the standard response to perceived laziness or insufficient output. Branding marked repeat offenders or those who attempted escape. The cruelty extended into all aspects of their existence. Cato the Elder deliberately fostered dissension among his slaves, believing that harmony among them posed a threat. He charged fixed fees for male slaves to spend time with female slaves, monetizing even their private interactions. After dinner parties, he ordered the flogging of any slave who had shown the slightest remiss in service, regardless of age or years of faithful work. For aging women who had endured decades of exploitation, the final years brought no dignity. Those who collapsed from exhaustion might be abandoned. Those who spoke of their suffering faced punishment for ingratitude. Those who could no longer perform their assigned tasks discovered that a lifetime of service meant nothing against the cold arithmetic of present utility. The denial of freedom and legal abandonment. Manumission, the formal process of freeing slaves, represented the single hope that might make years of suffering bearable. Roman society practiced manumission more frequently than many other slave societies, and the possibility of eventual freedom functioned as a tool of control, encouraging compliance and diligent service. Yet for aging female slaves, this path to freedom proved particularly treacherous. The economics of manumission worked against elderly women. Masters often required slaves to purchase their freedom, setting prices that reflected the slave's remaining productive years. A young woman in her teens or 20s, with decades of labor ahead, might negotiate manumission by promising years of service or accumulating savings from small earnings. But an aging woman, whose productive capacity had diminished, faced impossible calculations. Few would loan money to slaves with limited earning potential, and masters saw no incentive to free someone who had already given their best years. Augustus's marriage laws created a specific path to freedom for enslaved women who bore children. A female slave who produced a certain number of children could earn manumission. Yet this provision offered little hope to those already past childbearing age. The women who had spent their youth bearing children for their masters found that this reproductive exploitation yielded no freedom in their later years. The patron-freedwoman relationship also deterred masters from freeing elderly slaves. Upon manumission, the former master became the freedwoman's patron, and she owed lifelong obligations of service and respect. For aging women with diminished capacity, these obligations offered masters little value. Why free an elderly slave who could provide minimal service when selling her or working her until death proved more profitable? Legal restrictions compounded these barriers. The Lex Alia Sentia, enacted under Augustus, placed limits on the number of slaves a master could free by will, creating administrative obstacles that masters could invoke when elderly slaves sought freedom. Perhaps most cruel was the practice of deathbed manumission. Some masters, like Pliny the Younger, freed slaves just before death as an act of mercy. For women who had served faithfully for decades, this represented their only pathway to freedom, waiting until their master's final moments, hoping for a gesture of compassion that might never come. Even when granted, such freedom arrived too late to offer much beyond the dignity